It's episode 73 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. Thank you for your continued support of the Author Stories podcast. When you're at hankgarner.com, be sure to click on the iTunes link, click subscribe, and if you don't mind, leave a short review of the show and click the ratings stars. A 5-star review helps other people find the show. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, click on the Amazon links and purchase your Christmas gifts or Hanukkah gifts at Amazon using our link. When you do that, the Author Stories podcast gets a small commission from your purchases and allows us to keep bringing you great content like this from week to week. Also, check out our other great show at hankgarner.com, Two Book Nerds and a Microphone, where we break down our love of books each week. Thank you for listening. My guest this week is Craig Johnson, the author of the Walt Longmire Mystery series. Now on to our interview. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm very happy to have a special guest on the line with me, dialing in from sunny Wyoming this morning. Welcome, Craig Johnson.
I'd like to tell you it was sunny Wyoming, but we have a little bit of a blizzard coming in. Not so sunny today. So.
Oh, wow, that's we have crazy weather down south here. We have the fireplace on this morning, and this afternoon is supposed to be in the mid-70s. So you never know what you're going to get.
You're never that lucky. Once it gets to the end of October, the weather starts changing a little bit. But that's okay too for me, because I've got a life that's basically a balance between a ranch in Wyoming, up here near the Montana border, and the nearest town to where our ranch is has a population of 25. So it's pretty much an outlying area. But then then the other part is the writing part, and so for me, when everything's slowed down in the wintertime, and the snow comes in, and not so much to do at the ranch, during those seasons like that. That's when the writing kind of takes over, and it's kind of nice. It gives me a nice season to write in.
I love that idea of seasons and being able to mark, when this time in life lends itself to this activity, and that for me, that really tends to feed my creativity. Is that the same for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the best, writers that I've been inspired by, are ones who have a direct connection, with whatever their environment might happen to be. Right now I'm reading Faulkner's Sanctuary again. It just stuns me how connected he was, to his environment, to his geographic region. Like another Wendell Berry out of Kentucky is another one of my absolute favorites. And then of course, as far as the West is concerned, I think the master of that would have to be Walt Stegner. I think he's just an absolutely incredible writer that just evokes so much of not only what the West, the effect of what the West had on his writing, but even in his ability to define the West with words is just an incredible ability.
Yeah. Not enough people call out Wendell Berry as an influence, or as as someone who they respect their craft. I love that. I love how, and I even try to work some of the things I do around his concept of building place and building the characters of that place. That I love that answer.
Well, and just the idea of stewardship, it
Yeah.
is a strong one with me. It obviously, as a rancher, for me, the land and being on that land, is very, very important to me. And I don't think that there's a big transition from that, into the writing. Because with the writing, people always ask, and I always say, well, I wake up in Walt's world, I move in Walt's world. The Bighorn Mountains are right here beside me, about 14,000 foot. They have snow on them all for maybe 1 week out of the year.
Wow.
The wind's coming in about 40 miles an hour today, and I made sure I got all of my firewood all inside, and dried up, ready to go. And It's a part of that environment. I mean, one of my favorite statements about that was the one from Studs Terkel, where he said, nothing ever happened nowhere. And it's important, to remember that, because it informs, so much of the characters, so much of the locale, so much of the story and the plot has to be evolved. And in that sense, it's always going to be a natural kind of organism, that evolves, to a certain extent. I think you get into trouble whenever you start trying to assign characters or assign place and assign plot. I mean, all of those things, should kind of grow together to make a story, to make a novel. And, hopefully that's what you try and do, every time you start off.
Right. I begin each interview by asking a variation of the same question, and that is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer?
Boy, let's see. What would that be? I don't know. It's kind of evolved, from storytelling is what it all kind of evolved from. For me, I grew up in a family of storytellers. I grew up, very early at an age, realizing just how valuable, that was. I mean, if you've ever, spent 3 days, in a lineman shack, doing, stringing barbed wire with a guy whose conversational gambits are yep and nope, you'll understand very quickly how important it is, have somebody who can tell a story.
Oh yeah.
And and it's a valuable commodity. I mean, being able to rebuild a small block engine, that's a valuable skill. Being able to cook a fine meal or stitch up, a star quilt or build a house. Those are all valuable abilities. Storytelling's a valuable ability too. Especially in rural America. It doesn't matter, where that is in rural America, but a lot of times you're out and away, from all the electronics and all of the the modern conveniences, and so you're back to the most basic aspect of storytelling, and that's people just opening up their mouth and telling you a story. And so for me, it became a situation where I wanted to tell stories like that. But then, whenever you live in a ranch in a small town where the nearest town is only 25 people like that, it's going to be a very limited audience to be able to tell those stories to. And so my education was in writing, and I thought, well, maybe it's time you actually sit down and thought about writing something. And so that was how the first Walt Longmire novel came to be. I sat down and I wrote The Cold Dish. And the way I wrote it was, almost as if, you were to go in and sit down on a stool at the Busy Bee Cafe, and Walt Longmire was to turn to you and say, this is what happened to me last month. At that point in time, I don't even want you to remember that you're reading a book. I want you to just fall into that world and, be a part of that world.
And I hear that type of answer more than, well, maybe not more than you can imagine. Most writers give me some sort of answer like that. I've always been a storyteller. There's always been storytelling around me. There's, and it seems to be this thing that certain people are able to pick up on, and it just kind of becomes ingrained in who we are. You talked about how important that is, especially for rural America. What do you think it is that kind of holds this art form together for certain groups of people, and what is it that we lose when we get too busy in life, that we kind of lose track of that storytelling kind of thread in our life?
Well, obviously there's a tradition. There's a geographic tradition that lends itself and I don't think that you can specifically say that one is stronger than another. I mean, you can sit on the stoops in New York City like that, and and sit and listen and hear some really fantastic stories like that. You can also be stringing green beans like that, in Mississippi like that.
Oh yeah.
Great stories. Or you can be crouched over a hunting campfire in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming, and there's some really great stories. I just think that it's a human tradition to a certain extent, and the difficulty, of course, is the things that you've mentioned, in that technology does rob us of a certain amount of that, because a lot of us are hearing the same stories, or having these things foisted upon us, where the smaller stories, the quieter stories are the ones that are kind of slipping away. And to me, those are the ones that you try and focus on whenever you're writing the books. I remember when I was writing The Cold Dish, I was talking to a friend of mine from up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, Charles Little, old man, and he's a tribal elder up there, and his great grandfather fought, in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and I remember saying something to him about, well, okay, whenever the Cheyenne, and the Lakota and the Crow, whenever you guys, went in on that last attack on the 7th Cavalry, and he paused for a second. He goes, "Who told you that?" And I said, "Well, it's in all the books." He nods his head and he goes, "Yeah, white people's books."
Oh, wow.
Thing. We had those great big sharp 570, buffalo rifles. Why would we go in there and get shot by those pistols? Why would we do that? And he said, he said, my great grandfather, they just sat out there a little bit of distance like that and just picked them off, one by one like that. And that's the kind of history that is more of an oral tradition,
right.
Which is so very strong, within the Native American community, within the Northern Cheyenne. I mean, so many of the stories that I've heard and so much of the history that I've heard from these people, is by talking to them, and so little of their history. It's getting better now, like that, but so much of their history is transferred, with that oral tradition, and and that used to be, the major form of communication, between human beings. But now, we have books, now we have television, now we have movies, we have all the internet and all of these things, which gives it a run for its money. But boy, some of the charm of distance is lost. Whenever it's kind of been homogenized and everybody's hearing the same things. Like I was saying, those smaller histories, the things that aren't going to make it into the history books are going to be the ones that are going to be of interest to me, like that, because those are the little kernels of, detail that, really make your books, worth reading. I mean, I was doing the research for Spirit of Steamboat, the little book that takes place during Christmas time, with this, Mitchell B-25 bomber that, one of these old sheriffs, Lucian Connolly, who was a Doolittle Raider, actually pilots, to try and get a wounded child, down to Children's Hospital in Denver. And I remember going to the 69th reunion for the Doolittle Raiders and sitting there and listening to these old guys. Some of them are like in their 90s. And they're telling these stories, about, the raid, about the training, about all these different things during World War II. And these were just little stories. These weren't like the big epic aspects of the story that are going to end up in the, in the history books. And all I could think was, all these little stories are going to be lost, And so I did my level-headed best, to try and include as many of those as I possibly could, in the book itself, just simply because I was so afraid that, that they're going to be lost. And that's kind of our responsibility as writers, to try and, they say the devil's in the details, but the truth's all there too. So for me, it's important to try and include those things.
Right. I guess it's kind of like I heard, I guess several years ago now, that that in the last couple of generations, that younger kids coming up are losing their regional accents, due mostly to increased television consumption and that sort of thing, and we're losing the nuances of our speech that make us individual. And I guess, like you said, those stories that inform those, and that feeling of place is also unraveling to an extent.
Oh yeah, I mean that's always going to be the case. Whenever you've got a mainstream society that's going to be, pulling in that. But I don't know. We can be pretty trenchant. We can dig in our heels. And hold on to those things pretty well. I hate the thought, of visiting everywhere and everybody sounding like Telecasters, on
Right.
television. One of the things I really enjoy, one of the things I love, is accents. One of the things I really enjoy is, the word choices, that people in different geographic areas make. I mean, that's what's, so much fun about, writing a book. I mean, in many ways, writing a novel is kind of like, it's kind of like conducting a choral group. Each one of the voices, that's in, your books is there for a specific reason in telling a specific story. And, one of the biggest, mistakes that, I think a lot of beginning novelists make is all the characters sound alike.
Right.
And you see it on television, too. And you see it in movies and everything, where all the characters, have this, buzzy, millennial, type of, voice and word choices like that. And that's just, it's not very interesting. For me, each one of those voices has to be so distinct, has to be so importantly distinct that I don't even have to tell you. Hopefully, what I'm shooting for is that that I don't want you to even have to. I don't have to tell you who is talking. Hopefully, whenever you read the dialogue, you will know who that is simply by the force of that particular voice. Is what I've always shot for.
And you do that really well.
Thank you.
One thing I loved when I first picked up the cold dish was that in your dialogue there are very few dialogue tags, and they weren't needed because I knew exactly who was talking, and I could envision the scene perfectly. And I'd study good dialogue because it's so beautiful when it's done well, and so immersive, and you
It's so
really do that
painful
well.
when it's not.
Exactly, and that's why it's so beautiful when it works well, because we all have seen lots and lots of examples of it just being done horribly.
Right, right. No, it's for me that's one of the joys of writing the books, and probably the best compliment I ever got was George Guidall, who just received another one of these major Audible awards, for his recording of the new book Dry Bones. He's just an amazing individual and an incredible performer. And I'm very, very lucky to have him. And one of the things he said was, he says, I don't have to have that. I don't worry about those tag phrases. And he says, because you don't use them, and that's very nice for me, because all that does is remind people that they're reading a book. And he said, whenever I'm performing a book in an audio book, it's going to be like 8 hours long. And he said, it's like doing an 8-hour play is what it's like. And he said you don't use those tag phrases, and he says what's nice about that is it just allows people to just get into the storyline, and more importantly, allows me, to get into the storyline and become those characters. And I think that's something that that a lot of times is overlooked. I think you really do have to see, where is this character from? What is their educational background? What is their social background? What is what are the tangents, of their speech patterns? What are the type of, what's the voice there that you're looking for? An awful lot of times, I don't think, a lot of authors spend enough time, trying to research and find out, okay, where would that character be and what would they say in this given situation? One of the secret weapons, of course, that you can use, is, and I'm doing it right now, as a matter of fact, because I've got another novella coming out here in the spring called The Highwayman. And one of the big things that happens, during the course of the development of one of my novels is my poor wife will sit here on a stool, the other side of the kitchen table, with me and read the entire novel back to me out loud. And it's an acid test, is what it is. It is the literary litmus test, to discover bad dialogue, bad narrative, bad everything. I'm always telling students, if you ever want to find out what's wrong with your writing, what's wrong with your book, have somebody read it back to you aloud, not silently. Don't just sit there and read it yourself, because you'll go through and you'll edit and fix and repair as you go like that. But having somebody read it back to you aloud, every one of your mistakes, every one of your shortcomings like that will become manifestly evident so quickly it will just make you want to go out and chop wood or load hay or do something like that. Trust me.
I do that with mine, but I will read mine aloud to my family. But you're right. When I do that, I'm constantly jotting notes and things like that, because because I detect it. I'm going to do that next. I'm going to have someone else read it. I can't imagine a more torturous process, though.
No, it's cringeworthy, no doubt about it. I mean, you'll sit there and go, "Oh, and what was I thinking?" But it's a valuable process. It's a valuable process. I mean, one of the things we usually do, since we're home for the holidays, we have the luxury of being able to sit here at the ranch and do it. Generally, in Wyoming, I mean, we got a lot of driving, to get from place to place. It's like the 9th largest state, and the least populated state. And so, we spend a lot of time, in my truck, driving to events or driving places and doing things. And so it's not unusual to have a 6-hour, 8-hour drive to go someplace. And what's great about that is she generally doesn't get, car sick when she reads. And so she can read to me while it is that we're driving and, make notes, as we go along. And that's just priceless, for the quality of the work, I think.
No doubt. So tell me, where did Walt Longmire come from? You said that you pursued a degree in writing, so this was something that obviously was important to you, or that you had some idea that you wanted to pursue. But where did this first story come from, and how did Walt come to you?
Well, I mean, my education was in writing, and I always wanted to be a writer. But that's kind of like saying you want to be an astronaut. I mean,
Right.
actually, to be a writer and actually make enough of a living at it that you can continue, being a writer, is always the challenge. And so, for me, it became a situation where, I was trying to balance, what I wanted to do with what I needed to do, and I had premonitions of like being writing literary fiction, and all that type of thing, but. Man, that's a tough row to hoe to try and write one book every 8 or 10 years. I mean, you're generally going to have to do something else. You're going to have to be involved in either education or something that's going to help pay the rent. And so I had this idea that maybe what I wanted to do then was something like a hybrid, something that was kind of a cross between literary fiction. And all these other genres, because
Right.
With American literature, with American book sales, the genre is always a major aspect, simply because it's a selling tool is what it is. They can't sell your book unless they can, qualify it and say what exactly it is, to get it on that A table at Barnes and Noble, or to get the kind of response that you need, to be able to survive as a writer. And, my job, on the other hand, though, was to try and muddy the waters a little bit and try and do something a little bit different. Are they mysteries? Yeah. Are they Westerns? Yeah. Are they literary fiction? Yeah. Are they humor? Yeah. I'm trying to, include as many of those things as I possibly can, just to give, a breadth of, reading experience, to people that are maybe a little bit more sophisticated readers nowadays. I mean, I know that there's a lot of readers out there that just, read for the purpose of, whodunit. They're just an exercise book for them like that. But then again, there are a lot of people out there where, a simple whodunit that you used to be able to buy at the checkout line at the grocery store, and still can, they want a little bit more. They want, fully developed characters. They want an arc of storyline. They want environment. They want history. They want social implications. They want humor. They want all those things, and they also want to know who the heck did it by the time they get to the end. And so, what's nice about that is it kind of raises the level of the quality of writing, so that you're shooting for a little bit higher bar as far as that kind of thing is concerned. And so, in specifics, about Walt, going back to the first part of your question, the other excuse that I also use is that being a writer in many ways is like being a cop. If everybody's running in one direction, you probably need to be heading in the other.
Right.
When I'm doing a lot of times, I'm doing writers' conferences or things like that, and somebody's telling me about their YA novel about a vampire, and I'm thinking, that ship's kind of sailed, so unless you can do it better than everybody else out there, has, maybe you should think about trying to do something different, something that hasn't been done to death, rather than jumping on the bandwagon, go ahead, and put your own train together and head in the other direction. And so for me, about 15, 16 years ago, that's when all the CSI stuff was really kind of big. Everything was all about CSI. It was all about, the forensics, the ballistics, the DNA evidence and all these things. And I ran into a DCI investigator here in Wyoming, and I asked him, I said, well, how long does it take you guys to get DNA evidence? And then he pauses for a second. He says, is this a high-profile case? And I said, yeah, let's pretend like it is. And he said, about 9 months. And I said, okay, so that's not really particularly honest what they're doing in television and, these books and all this stuff. And he goes, no, it's not. He said, these are, what you're seeing there is okay, yeah, maybe the NYPD, maybe the LAPD or Chicago PD, can get, quick answers, but certainly not in the 5 minutes it seems to take, in this modern era of CSI stuff. And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, okay, what if you had a protagonist who was the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America? What it would force you to do is deal more with place, more with character, more with relationships and that type of thing, and not be so, crippled by technology. I mean, the thing I laugh about is that since the TV show came out, there are all these people that are always asking me. They're always saying, "Why doesn't Walt carry a cell phone?" And my immediate response is, "Have you ever been to Wyoming? Unless you just want to take selfies with the pronghorn antelope, it really isn't going to be much use. There is no service, the majority of the state." And so, for me, that's kind of how, Walt evolved. It's how Walt came to be. He was going to have to be kind of old school, in his crime detecting skills. Like that, he was going to have to fall back on, harken back to another time period, and that kind of informed that character in a lot of different ways.
I came to your novels probably the way a lot of readers have, and it's through the TV show. I discovered Longmire on A&E, loved it, and then sought the books out. Have you? How has the TV show and the subsequent success of that affected your writing career? And do you have much creative input to the TV show?
I was very fortunate in the sense that, it's like any other business. You hear a lot of authors, they'll complain, about Hollywood. Even really big name authors that have had, big name projects done, they'll complain about Hollywood. But I think what it is that, whenever I hear an author who's complaining about the movie that they made out of his book, the first thing I always think is, did you take the check? Did you take the
Right.
check they wrote out to you? Well, then, you really should just have a great big steaming cup of shut the hell up, because, you took the money. Okay, and so, if you didn't want that to happen, then you should have done some research, and you should have seen what it is that these people do, and, what they're involved with, what other projects have they done. I think that Hollywood, in many ways, is a lot like any other business. It's like a publisher or an agent or, somebody that you hire, that you're going to dig a ditch for or something. It doesn't really matter. You need to know who you're working with, and that'll give you an indication as to, what kind of work they do and whether it is that you want to be in cahoots with them. That's a Wyoming litigious term, cahoots. And, you have to make a decision on that, and hopefully you make the right decision, but, I think that that's important. And like any other business, Hollywood, there are good people, there are bad people, and, you really need to do the research to make sure that you're getting the best quality, individuals to work with that you can. I did some research on these people that were wanting to do a television show at Warner Brothers, the showrunners, and they were an interesting group of people like that who had a history of doing interesting work. They had done all of these different shows, like The Closer and Nip Tuck, and all of these things. And so I knew not only could they get things done, but they also did things in an interesting way. And then the first meetings that I had with them, they were extraordinarily knowledgeable about the books. They'd read the books. They knew the characters. They knew the place, all of these things, And so, with all of those, things in mind, it felt like probably it was a good decision to make, to go with a TV show, because that was another transition that I had to make in the sense that I'd long thought that what would end up happening is that it would end up being a feature film. I thought, well, The Cold Dish, the first book in the Walt series, would end up being a feature film, and we'd done a little courting dance, with a lot of producers and directors and actors and everything, for a couple of years there before Warner Brothers finally came out with this package deal. That I got to meet everybody that was involved with the project, and they were going to put up the financial backing, to get the project up and going, which is always, the stumbling block with Hollywood or any other business. It's always, money, and so that just seemed like a good idea. The other thing about it was is that it gave the opportunity to tell more than one story. If you're not if it's not a movie about space zombies or something, then it's probably not going to be in the movie theaters for more than maybe a week. And so I thought, well, it's always going to be about positioning for visibility for the books, because that's what I am. I'm a cowboy author in a town of 25. I'm not looking to move to L.A. to be a screenwriter. I'm not looking to move to New York or anything like that. I like where I am. I like what I do. So it's always going to be about visibility for the books. Well, the thing about a TV show is that every week, it's coming up there, and it has an opportunity to gather an audience. If it doesn't, pull an audience, right from the very get-go, as the weeks go by, more and more people hear about it, more and more people see it, and then now especially the way that people can record entire series of a television series, or they can stream all of the episodes or previous seasons of of a television show, then it makes a big difference. The visibility factor goes up remarkably. And it can be a weird thing like that because, I was fortunate enough that they made me a creative consultant in the show. And I think one of the main reasons for that, of course, was that, they were down in Southern California, and so they needed to hire somebody who was going to be an expert on sheriffing, somebody who was going to be an expert on the Northern Cheyenne, somebody who was an expert on Northern Wyoming, all these different aspects of the storylines. Well, they could hire half a dozen people, and pay them, to do it, or they could just, keep me on a retainer and have me, kind of tell them about this world that I'd already been writing about, for 7 years.
Right.
And as far as the success of the books are concerned, as far as the response is concerned, the last book before the television show came out was Hell is Empty. And it made it onto the extended New York Times bestsellers list, before the television show actually came out. But then the next year when the TV show came out, we made it on the written list at I don't know what it was, something like 21st or something like that on the New York Times bestsellers list. And that's done nothing but, incrementally, grow every season with every book to where last year's book, Dry Bones, was number 5 on the New York Sellers list. And so it's nice. It's funny because, a lot of times, when I meet people, the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm really sorry, but I didn't know about your books until I saw the TV show. And my immediate response is, you don't have to apologize. That's okay.
Right.
Because they're always kind of apologetic about it. And I'm like, you don't have to be apologetic about it. It's okay. You found me. That's the important thing.
Right. Welcome into the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Heck yeah. One thing that I really loved about the way I came to your writing is that I had these images in my mind from the TV show, but then when I started reading the books, I felt like that I discovered more and more of the characters, and I already had I had a baseline to begin from. But the books are so much more. They're so much deeper. They're and I think that people should look at it that way. That there's this is an opportunity to discover more and to get a deeper understanding than this doesn't translate or that doesn't translate. That's just my opinion.
No, well, that's always going to be the case. I mean, that is always going to be the problem that Hollywood will have. As much money as they have, as many talents as they have, because it's a powerful medium. It's such an incredibly powerful medium. But it's really hard to stand up to a book, in numerous ways. First of all, I think there's an intimacy that goes along with the interpretation of words. Whenever you're reading along there, I mean, it's so custom fit to your psyche. I mean, what your mind sees, is so personal. Before Robert Taylor, came along, I could be talking to a group of 300 people that and have a courtroom artist come in and have every single one of them describe what Walt Longmire looked like. Well, you'd have 300 different Walt Longmires, and that's the magic of a book. That ability to be able to take 350, 400 pages, and do whatever it is you wanted to do with it. That incredible, weapon that you got, of course, is the reader's imagination. You're right in their head, right there with their imagination. And boy, as wonderful as Hollywood is, it's very difficult to compete with, the reader's imagination. It's so powerful and so specific that it makes it a difficult thing to compete with. It's been a little bit better now since we made the leap, from A&E over to Netflix. with the television show, because we're not quite as limited by that 42-minute basic cable format, which is kind of difficult, to tell a story in 42 minutes. To me, I would read the scripts and I would look at it and think, this is like haiku is what this is like. Whereas, for me, I can take the time to develop, the environs and the character and the relationship, describe all the things that are specific to what it is that I want the reader to be aware of, and it's tough like that. And it was tough for them too, like that, because I would read the scripts. One of the things they would do as a creative consultant, I read the scripts and give them feedback. Was they would send me the scripts, and I would see a really great scene, say between Lou Diamond Phillips, as Henry, and Robert Taylor as Walt, like that, and I would think, oh wow, this is going to be a really incredible scene. I can't wait to see what they do with this. And then I'd get the episode, and the scene wasn't there. And the reason, of course, being that they ran long all the time like that. Well, the great thing with being with a streaming service like Netflix is that Longmire has all the time in the world. They don't really care over at Netflix how long the episodes are. They can be as long as they need to be to just tell the story. And boy, that's a powerful advantage to have in that great competition out there.
Oh, we really are in a I hate to use a cliche like golden age, but the opportunity to be able to to have a company like Netflix that would take it and then just take those shackles of the typical broadcast medium off is crazy. I hope authors realize what a prime opportunity time we're living in.
Oh, it is. I mean, in some ways, a lot of people have said, that the way that that television is evolving, with the serial, episodes, and the lengthier, episodes themselves. Like, it's almost as if, it's almost as if, like, that television is taking the place of those grand 19th century novels, that used to be so episodic, like that, and like Bleak House, and things like that.
Right.
I mean, they fit so well, into this new dynamic, this new format, and I think it's changing. I mean, people have just gotten away from that. I mean, so many people nowadays don't even have a television, where they're getting broadcast television. I mean, and a lot of them are annoyed, by the fact that that they're paying as much, for, cable television packages as they are for the rent. And, what Netflix is like $8 a month or something like that. And,
right.
And to my own, enjoyment, I'm finding all of these quirky, strange little series, some of them, from the BBC, some of them from these Nordic countries, some of them, U.S. productions like that never got a chance because they didn't fit, into the pigeonholes, that the networks and the cable companies, wanted. And so here you got all these magnificent little series that nobody knows about, that are really great watching. I mean, I don't know how many times I'll be, flipping through the channels in the evening if I'm, just want to just sit in front of the television, just, let it wash over me, like that, and there's nothing on. There's nothing. And so I'll flip on over to Netflix, like it, and there'll be, a couple of episodes or there'll be a couple of series, that I've never even heard of, and I'll start watching them when I'm like sitting there thinking, why haven't I heard of this? Why didn't I hear about this? Why didn't I know that this existed?
It's so awesome. I want to shift gears for just a second and ask you about when you wrote that first Longmire novel. You said that you wanted it to feel like you were sitting on a stool next to Walt Longmire, and he said, "This is what happened to me last month." And you write these in the first person perspective, and that's also one advantage that the books have over TV or film is the ability to convey that first person perspective. Immediately when you open the book, you're diving right into Walt's mind and his world, and you're looking through his eyes. Did you ever debate on using first person versus third person, or was it ever not going to go this way?
Well, it was interesting because the first person kind of like fallen into disfavor.
Yeah.
With a lot of writing schools like that, and a lot of writing theories, at the point in
Well,
time.
I think it's that literary versus genre
Yeah, and
demarcation.
I can understand that, because there's a lot of bad writing. It's a tricky tense, it's a tricky tense to take on like that, because you can either do it, or you can do it badly like it, and so it's kind of a difficult tense to write in, and it's produced a lot of bad novels, but um, I have to admit, like for me, there's never been a tense that has the electricity and the energy that that first person storytelling ability has. I mean, call me Ishmael is what it all boils down to. I'm
Yeah.
there with Richard Russo, like at the Tucson Book Festival, and somebody was asking about tense or something like that, and any tense is a good tense as long as there really isn't any the only it's like any other, the genres and all that kind of stuff. There really are only two genres when you get right down to it. There's good writing, and then there's bad writing. So what you aspire to, of course, is the good stuff, and trying to avoid the bad. But for me, there is a tradition, within crime fiction, of that first person, because the advantage that it gives you is that there are a couple of cardinal rules that you have to aspire to if you're going to write even skirting crime fiction or mystery novels or that type of thing. And then one is the playing fair system like that, which is if you're going to write these books, and you're going to do the mechanics of a protagonist going through an investigation, you have to give the reader the same information that your protagonist has, to make that fair, because otherwise, you get these horrible novels where a character suddenly appears, in chapter 24 that was never introduced anywhere along the line, and it's just not fair. You have to play fair with the audience and your readership, and I think that obviously, if you're using first person, the reader is getting the exact same information that the protagonist is getting at the exact same time that they're getting it. And so what that does is it makes for a pretty level playing field, as far as the characters are concerned, and as far as the mechanics, of a mystery are concerned. And so, it's not something that's completely unusual within that particular genre, but it had kind of fallen into disfavor, and it allows for all kinds of opportunities too. I mean, sometimes I'll hear people who will say, well, they're just I really like the books because there's a lot more humor in the books than there is in the television show. Well, one of the advantages that I have in the books is that you're in Walt's head, so you're hearing and seeing the things that Walt is thinking so much of the time, like that, which is a luxury that's not in the television show. And so a lot of the humor that's in the books, even though I think that there's more humor in the television show than a lot of people give it credit for, there's not going to be quite as much as there is in the book, simply because you see and feel and hear what it is that Walt is thinking, and an awful lot of the humor in the books tends to come from that. But hey, it's the way I started that first book, and now I'm on book number 12, I think it is, and I've never had to look back. It's a comfortable place to be inside Walt's head.
I'll bet. And you're right. On the TV show, you get to see smirks and little reactions from Walt, but yeah, in the book you get to hear it as it's bouncing around in his head. That's a great uh, observation. One other thing I wanted to ask you is when you're dealing with uh, situations where you're in a very specific place with very specific people and people groups. You also have to not only take into account all of the things that make the people who they are, but also the struggles that come with living in this particular area and with these particular people groups. Where with a lot of books that I write, being in Mississippi, and we have our own very storied past, shall we say, that we have to deal with. Excuse me, and the struggle between people groups and how you go from a very shameful past to hopefully a brighter future. In the Longmire books, you also are dealing with the uh, the population, but then also the reservation and the tension between these two places and these two people groups. Is there any conscious effort on your part to bring up some of these issues, or is this just part of life and the culture there? And would you like to speak to that at all?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, obviously, it's part of the process. It's part of the world. It's part of the environs. So it needs to be there. But then again, it's also calculated. To a certain extent. I mean, the very first book, The Cold Dish. What happens? The basic plot line for the very first Walt Longmire book is one where there's a young woman, who's a product of fetal alcohol syndrome, and she's Northern Cheyenne, and she's taken into a basement, and she's raped, by these four young men who are white, from an adjacent town to the reservation. And, through this, court case that's the backstory, of The Cold Dish, these guys basically get away with suspended sentences after a couple of years and basically walk away. The problem being that somebody starts dispatching them one by one with a Sharps buffalo rifle. And it's a question of race. It's a question of what is justice on the reservation, what is justice off the reservation. And so, the plot line of that first book, really kind of informed the characters, especially of both, Walt Longmire, the sheriff of Absaroka County, and Henry Standing Bear, like a prominent citizen, within the Indian community. And I knew that the book, the trick, of course, for me is some of my favorite writers are the ones who write those big epic stories. They write they aren't afraid. They don't back away from a large canvas, I guess is the way I would describe it.
Yeah.
The Hugos, the Dickenses, the Dostoevskys, the Steinbecks, those are, Harper Lee, Faulkner, all of these, authors, I think that, really go after big, issues, and big social issues. And one of the things that they knew is that, that those big social issues are great. And you can talk about words like, justice and liberty and honesty and truth, and all of these things, but those are abstractions is what those are. Those words have great meaning, but they are somewhat abstract, so the way that you're going to deal with those larger issues is with character. You better get it down to people. It has to be a scope and a size, in which the reader can understand. And the way that the phrase that I use to describe that is that I can tell you about the horrors of, the French Revolution, or I can tell you about a woman sitting at the base of the guillotine, knitting family crests, into, a blanket there. That to me brings it back down to a human scale. I think that's always going to be the challenge of what it is that you're going to do. And so for me, the writing of that first book, The Cold Dish, became what is justice on the reservation, what is justice off the reservation? What does this book have to say about race relations in the contemporary American West? And that was kind of a tone that was set in the first book that continues, to evolve with each novel, and sometimes, it's obviously going to be different social issues that you're dealing with, but those echoes are still going to be there in everything that I write. To me, that's extraordinarily important.
And the character of Henry is a great creation in that he definitely has one foot planted in each world.
Mm-hmm.
Was that very intentional to have this character who could bridge that gap when you needed?
Oh, absolutely. The dirty little secret, of course, of all of this is that, one of my favorite quotes is from Wallace Stegner, where he says, the greatest piece of fiction ever written is that disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off of anybody alive or dead. But, what a crock that is. I mean, that's your job, to go find interesting people and put them, populate your novels with them. And, and with only 500,000 people in the state of Wyoming, I get into trouble every once in a while, and somebody will say, is that so-and-so? It's in your third book? And I have to say I can either confirm or deny that may be the person that you just mentioned. But it's even worse, up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, simply because there are only 5,000 enrolled members of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And fortunately, the books and the television show are extraordinarily popular up there, and so it gives me a little bit of an entree as far as that's concerned. But also, before the books, and before the TV show, I lived here. Those are my neighbors, those are my friends, and for me, to see the struggles that they have in an attempt, to try and maintain and to hold on to the culture and to the history and the society and even the language of their people like that, but then also be able to navigate within the contemporary society like that. It's a challenge, and it's a worthy challenge like that, and it's a joy to include that in the books and try and give it an accurate representation, an honest representation.
And you've done that from at least from this outsider's perspective.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Craig Johnson, thank you so much for taking time out of your holiday week to come on the show. What do you have coming up next that we can look forward to, and where can people find you, connect with you, and get plugged into this world of Walt Longmire?
Well, let's see. There's all kinds of opportunities. Even with a Luddite like me, with my limited technological abilities, we're on Twitter at ucrosspop25. And then, let's see, on Facebook, you can find the Craig Johnson Facebook page with the blue check mark, which is the official one. And there aren't that many Craig Johnsons out there with cowboy hats, so it's not that hard to find me. And then, of course, there's our website, which is CraigAllenJohnson.com, CraigAllenJohnson.com. And then, as far as the books that are coming up, obviously, the series, the new fourth season of Longmire is now running on Netflix, along with season 1, 2, and 3. And we just got announced that season 5 will be commence production here, coming up probably in February.
Nice.
Be released probably in September of 2016. Then the newest book, of course, is one that's coming out this spring, probably in the middle of May. And it's another little novella, is what it is, somewhat akin to Spirit of Steamboat. It's called The Highwayman. And what happens with that one is there's a highway patrolman, Rosie Wayman, who's been in the books before, who gets transferred to Troop G over in the Wind River Canyon area. And the problem is she's been transferred over there, and every night she gets a 1078 call. 1078 officer needs assistance. 1078 officer needs assistance. The problem being that the officer that seems to be calling her every night on her radio has been dead since 1979. So she decides she needs a little bit of help from Walt and Henry, who come down to the Wind River Reservation to see if they can help out with that. But that's The Highwayman. It'll be out in the spring in May. And then the next Walt Longmire book, the full-length Walt Longmire novel, as opposed to the novella, is called An Obvious Fact, and will be out in the fall. Probably about the same time that Netflix releases the 5th season of Longmire.
You're just stringing us along. I can't wait. I can't wait. Craig, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I wish you continued success.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.